Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Veloz webinar, Ensuring Reliability in Public EV Charging. My name is Muni Krishna, and I am Veloz's Strategic Partnership Director, and I'll be your moderator today. Veloz's goal with our webinar series is to drive policy education and to identify market solutions to achieve total electrification of the transportation sector. Today's webinar is focused on reliability in public EV charging, or more simply put, whether a charging station works and how well it works. This is a critical barrier for consumers as they evaluate whether they want to get into an EV, and we have assembled a group of industry experts to discuss their efforts to ensure that publicly available charging stations are working correctly. I want to take a second to point you to a detailed fact sheet about this topic that was sent with the last Veloz newsletter. This document is a backgrounder on today's topic to help explain some of the discussion. It can be found on our website at www.veloz.org. Click on the program menu and then click on our webinar series page. We are recording today's webinar and we're going to take audience questions at the end. So before we jump into today's panel discussion, allow me to tell you a little bit about Veloz. Veloz believes that the future is electric for all. All vehicles are electric, all people, corporations, and agencies who want or need a car or truck can and do choose electric, and all energy that powers these vehicles is carbon-free. Veloz engages its powerhouse members, public-private partnerships, programs, policy engagement, and public awareness campaigns to overcome barriers to electrification. We invite you to explore membership on the Join Us page at veloz.org. I also want to point everyone to the latest EV market report on veloz.org, presented in collaboration with the California Energy Commission and California Air Resources Board. We recently achieved the 1 million EVs sold in California milestone, and we could not be more excited. Sign up for our newsletter on veloz.org to receive this information quarterly. Our Q1 2022 EV market report will be released in May. All right, let's jump into it. To kick us off today, we are thrilled to introduce Commissioner Patricia Monaghan from the California Energy Commission, a founding member of Veloz. Commissioner Monaghan is the lead commissioner for clean transportation, and she presides over much of California's funds that are going to EV infrastructure. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Patricia Monaghan.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I usually go by Patty, although I'll take Patricia in a formal setting. I just want to thank the Veloz team for hosting this workshop and for all just the great work that you do, not just because we're a founding member, but because Veloz is really impactful. In fact, just the other day, I was sending my daughter a link to the Veloz site because some of her friends want to buy electric vehicles. And I was like, go here, this is where you get all the information. It really is amazing, all that Veloz is able to do. So I am really happy also to be here to talk about this really important topic. As California doubles down on a zero-emission transportation future, we need to make sure that refueling infrastructure is convenient, affordable, and reliable. My agency, the California Energy Commission, is responsible for the build-out of zero-emission vehicle refueling infrastructure. This includes both chargers for battery electric vehicle and hydrogen for fuel cell electric vehicles. And so the topic of reliability on the charger network is near and dear to my heart. But before I do a deep dive on that, I just want to set the stage for California's leadership on electric vehicles. So we're helping lead the way globally on this transition. Governor Newsom issued an executive order last year, or 2 years ago, sorry, that set the state on a course to zero out emissions from all transportation. That's not just passenger cars, but trucks, buses, even off-road equipment like construction equipment. And when he issued that executive order 2 years ago, it was the most aggressive in the world. And you know, the California Air Resources Board is already developing regulations to meet that executive order. And we are seeing industry step up in a way that I've never seen before. And as somebody who's been in this space for a long time, I just think it's amazing to see the transformation in terms of where investment is flowing by industry. We're seeing the number of models increase dramatically. You know, I'm really excited about the Ford F-150 and the Lightning. It has 200,000 orders already. So, you know, there's an appetite that consumers are expressing for these vehicles. And as Mooney showed, we're seeing even in the market, in California's market, this really play out. So in Q1 of this year, electric vehicles were 16% of new vehicle sales. That's the highest ever. And we're just like on this upward trend when it comes to electric vehicle sales. I think the fact that gas prices are so high also is playing into that. And people are seeing like, hey, this is an opportunity to save money at the pump while having cleaner air and kind of pretty fun vehicles to drive. So I think now our biggest challenge really to electrifying transportation is ensuring that there is a convenient, reliable, affordable infrastructure that makes it easy for anybody to drive an electric vehicle. So my agency has, in addition to building out ZEV infrastructure, we're also responsible for analysis around what the infrastructure needs are. We analyze what it's going to take to reach our 2030 goals. And we found we'll need 1 million public and shared private chargers for passenger vehicles. We expect to have 8 million passenger vehicles by 2030. And so that will take nearly 1 million chargers. We're also going to need 160,000 chargers for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And so, you know, that's a big ramp up, right? The oil industry had 100 years plus to build out gas stations. And we're talking about making that a similar transition in the next 10, 15 years. So we've got our job before us. Governor Newsom, in his most recent budget proposal, is putting money behind his executive order to electrify all transportation. The governor is proposing $6 billion in the state budget to accelerate ZEVs, including $2 billion just for ZEV infrastructure, which I'm very excited about. I hope you guys are excited about that as well, and talk to your legislators if you are, because we want to make sure funding for ZEVs gets to the finish line in the budget process. The governor's proposing to actually front load $900 million of those investments just for light duty chargers. And that's because of the gas crisis. Like right now with oil so high, the governor is really trying to provide some relief to consumers, you know, in terms of a payment to consumers to help with just paying for fuel in this time, but also to provide an alternative to gasoline. 300 million of that would be for chargers at home, and 600 million would be towards DC fast charging, you know, networks that would make it easier for you to drive from across the state and get access to fast charging when you need it. I'm also happy to say we have now a partner in the federal government. The federal infrastructure bill passed last year provided 384 million for DC fast charging along transportation corridors. So that's a great addition to the big bucks that the state is ponying in this space. There could also be some funds from alternative fuel corridors that we might be able to get access to for EV charging. So now we have a federal partner. We got money, and hopefully we'll get some money to be able to build out the ZEV infrastructure. But now the challenge also is, you know, can we get it right? So this analogy is overused, but I think it's really appropriate here, that we could be at an inflection point in the growth of ZEV adoption and ZEV infrastructure. And we have the opportunity and the obligation to try to get it right. And that means careful consideration of equity and inclusion, power levels and future proofing, siting and connectivity, and reliability, accessibility, and affordability. So at the Energy Commission, we're committed to spending at least half of our funds to advance equity. We have some analysis around what are the equity implications of the current charger distribution, and some work to do to make sure that if you live in a rural community, a low income community, a tribal community, or a disadvantaged community, that you can get access to ZEV infrastructure. So now let me turn to the reliability problem. And it is a problem. Actually, just yesterday, Cool the Earth shared with us a study that they commissioned from a UC Berkeley emeritus professor. And the study used volunteers to evaluate chargers, DC fast chargers in the Bay Area. They went to like every single DC fast charger apparently in the Bay Area. And they found that 23% of the chargers weren't even working. So like nearly a quarter weren't working. And of the ones that where the volunteer was able to start charging, only about half of those worked from the first swipe of the credit card chip. The rest of them, it took multiple cards, or sometimes it would take an app or a membership card to be able to get access to the charging. And I think this really confirms some of the concerns, anecdotal concerns about reliability. And we need to address it in our agreements from the state and hopefully in the broader market. A 50% success rate in any other retail transaction would not be considered acceptable, and it shouldn't here. So the most immediate avenue of influence we have from the Energy Commission perspective is to use our funding agreements as a way to enhance reliability. So I'm going to nerd out for just a few minutes and talk about how the Energy Commission is working to promote reliable charging. So in last year's Budget Act, there were actually some requirements put on us to make sure that there's some provisions around reliability. That data requirement includes, and I quote, average charger or refueling station downtime. So we are putting this into our grant agreements and expanding on it. In our two most recent grant funding opportunities for rural electric vehicle charging, or REV, and charging for multifamily housing, or REACH, the applications had to include an operations and maintenance plan, and warranties, service, and maintenance were eligible expenses. Both of these required 5 years of 97% uptime, and that's an enforceable requirement. So we held a workshop in early March asking for stakeholder feedback on further defining reliability and how to incorporate it into funding agreements in the future. We welcome comments and feedback, so please do give us your thoughts on that. And we're developing more explicit reliability standards with record keeping and reporting requirements, coupled with preventative maintenance and interoperability requirements for state-funded chargers. And I want to emphasize reliability isn't always able to be defined by remote monitoring. Hardware can be non-functional, while the software or station heartbeat signifies that the station is operational. We're looking at whether it makes more sense to require reliability for every charger, or for a charging station that may have multiple chargers to allow some redundancy. For larger sites, we're exploring this idea of redundancy as a strategy to ensure reliability on a station basis. As the number of chargers per site increases, the likelihood of a consumer being inconvenienced or stranded goes down. And we've seen this actually play out in the world of Tesla. So let me just sum up. So I am convinced we can meet the challenge of building out refueling charging infrastructure that's convenient, affordable, and reliable, but we aren't there yet. It's going to take money, it's going to take policies, and it's going to take a partnership with industry to be able to accomplish this. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to hearing the panelists.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Patty Monaghan. We really appreciate your thoughts and your leadership at the CEC, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, please help me group in welcoming our industry expert for today's panel. We have Camille Terry, co-founder and CEO of Charger Health, Tom Ashley, Vice President of Policy and Market Development at Shell Recharge Solutions, Drew Bennett, EVP of Operations at Volta Charging, and Dan O'Shea, VP of Business Development at ABB eMobility. If all of our panelists can come on camera, that would be great. All righty, let's start with you, Dan. ABB is the fast charging manufacturer for some of the world's largest charging networks. What do your customers look for in your equipment to ensure that they are the most reliable products in the field that they can be?
Thanks, Mooney, and thanks, Commissioner Monaghan, for all your great comments and all the work you're doing. I'd say 4 things generally people look for: reliability, longevity, a track record, and support. And whether it's a large customer, small customer, it doesn't matter. Reliability is critical. I mean, we've learned that sometimes the hard way. We do a few things that we make apparent to our customers as far as the, from production to installation. A factory acceptance test, a site acceptance test. We require these documents filed with us at the time of commissioning of the station. Our preference would be for a certified tech to do the installation and the commissioning. And this is actually a kind of a green job opportunity, right? For training of electricians and techs, because you don't always need an electrician to commission and service a station. So customers look for that from us. They have confidence in us. Like I said, reliability and track record. We've been making electrical gear for over 130 years, power electronics for 50 years, and chargers for 13 years. And so there is a high level of confidence in the ABB hardware that we've been making and selling and iterating for years. People look for a significant install base. And this is going to be a bit of a challenge over the next few years because there's going to be a lot of new players. And there should be, right? We're going to have a massive market. The funding that's coming down the pike is the likes of which we've never seen. There's going to be new players. And so everyone has to kind of make sure that the new players are going to be reliable, safe, consistent, et cetera. And then the other thing is standing behind what you make and having the support to be able to make sure that if there is an issue, that you're on it, that you have the team, you have the support to be able to do that, whether that is OEM support or some of the partners that you use, whether it's a network or a service partner, depending on whether it's a turnkey solution that has been requested or however that works, because there's many ways, that there is support there from credible technicians.
Great. Thanks so much, Dan. You know, we just heard from Commissioner Monaghan, a small study that was done in the Bay Area about fast charging. You know, fast charging can get a bad rap due to the complicated nature of the technology. What does ABB do in the way of best practices for engineering or manufacturing that you could impart to other manufacturers as they come up in the industry?
So in a nutshell, we build, test, deploy, and we iterate. So, I mean, one example is the serviceability of chargers in the field, right? The latest iteration of our all-in-one cabinet is easier to place back to back and then easier to access through the doors, right? We learned that because it wasn't as easy, with our first tranche as it should have been, right? And so now we've iterated to do that. The procurement and manufacturing of power modules, this is the main issue, right, with fast charging. These are the guts of the fast charger, making sure that the best quality, because they're the most sensitive to heat and cycles from fast charging. So that's something that is critically important that we've done ourselves. We've learned over time. We procure the best. We make sure that they're the best. And reliability is more than just components. So this is really critical to understand that there are a lot of players in this realm. Commissioner Monaghan brought up the credit card reader issue. This is just one item that is one of the biggest pain points in the industry. And I think what folks don't realize is that you've got a piece of hardware, a charger, that the credit card is generally a subcomponent. And then you usually have 1, 2, or 3 communication modes that are going through that credit card reader. And so you've got an OCPP signal, you've got the hardware signal, you've got the credit card settlement signal. I mean, you have to make sure that everything is interoperable. So interoperability is not just a charger to a network, it's a charger to a vehicle. It's the charger and the network with the credit card reader. On the other side of that, you have all of the banks and credit cards and the bank issuing the credit cards that all have slightly different parameters for credit holds and clearances and settlements. There's a lot going on, right, inside that little credit card reader that we need to smooth out.
Dan, that's so interesting, especially just that one component of a much larger system has to have all of the reliability of the rest of the system. That's fascinating. One last question for you, sir. You're a global manufacturer. How does ensuring hardware reliability change in different parts of the world, or does it?
Well, I mean, it's a global supply chain, right? I mean, it most definitely is. Now there's localization, right? So where you can stand up a factory in a big market, and that is going to take some of the global strain out of it. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be global, right? So it's the supply chain diversity has risen to the top of everyone's list, right? All you have to do is ask someone, what was your lead time 18 months ago versus what is it today and why? we will have, first, second, and third tier suppliers. We will have redundancy. This is really, really critical. Even with all that, when you have issues like additional COVID lockdowns in China, the situation in Ukraine, right? This is devastating and horrible, and it's affecting human lives first and foremost. It's affecting the supply chain for Europe, and then this has a knock-on effect, right? And so, we're making an effort at more localization. This is important, but we all have to understand that it's still going to be a global supply chain. Having transparent relationships with all of your suppliers is critical. And at the end of the day, sometimes what I find out is when someone expresses, say, dismay at our lead time, it's not just EV chargers, transformers, panel boards, switch gear. I mean, everything is affected. And so, planning longer time horizons is probably one good answer to this question.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dan. Drew, you're up next from Volta Charging. Drew, our audience would be curious to know, from an operational standpoint, what is your organization's approach to ensuring both L2 network reliability and hardware reliability? And is one more difficult to maintain?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Nice to be here with you. So we're a network operator. We operate level 2 and DC fast stations. As an operator, we're like super highly incentivized to care about uptime. So these are really big questions for us. I mean, people might know Volta for our big media screens that are part of our charging stations, but they might not know that basically our company's thesis that underlies the structure of our stations is that the driving customer is just as, if not more valuable than the kilowatt hour we're giving them. And so we invest a lot in understanding and influencing customer behavior. So a good customer experience, super important to our business model. We're also like this really mission-driven company. Accelerating the electrification of communities is really what gets us out of bed every day. So, we have this model with our screens that lets us go into neighborhoods or communities that maybe don't have EV adoption, as high of an EV adoption as others. And what are we doing? We're basically, we hope, solving the chicken and the egg problem by putting charging that lets people buy vehicles, but they'll only do that if they have an understanding and a belief that these charging stations are reliable, available. So this is like really important that we get on the right side of this. So maybe I'll walk you guys through how we think about it as an operator. To me, there's 3 big pillars that we care about in order to kind of make sure that, it's not just, is your hardware good, is your networking and your back end good? It's also about diagnosing it well, fixing it well, and communicating about it well to customers. Because the worst thing that can happen is something's broken, but it looks like we don't know about it. And that's when people start to lose faith in the viability of the network and everything else. So the 3 pillars for me are diagnostics, communication with customers, and then your field support and your resolution functions. So for diagnostics, what we do for our network, we have connected devices, we have 24/7 monitoring and logging. We certainly ingest error codes from the charging hardware. That's super important. But you also need algorithmic assessments because our devices don't always know when they're broken. Maybe it's a mechanical failure, maybe it's something else. So we really, at our company, we invest a bunch in AI and machine learning for a bunch of reasons, both for planning our network and understanding customers, but also we apply that to our understanding of the network. So you have to make sure that you're looking at what's going on your network. And if something doesn't look right, even though it's not throwing an error code, you should be flagging it, checking it out. So diagnostics and investing in that and constantly getting better, super important. Also communicating with customers. I've been in the industry for a really long time. We've talked a lot with customers and what they care about. Uptime is important, but so is people feeling like they're not getting ambushed with a broken station. So if a station does break, which happens, are we telling them that? Can they know that so they don't waste a trip and have this expectation of a good experience and being disappointed for something they consider critical infrastructure. So this also has to be very good. So we pipe our availability data to customer-facing interfaces, both on their phones and then physically on the station. You gotta have if-then scenarios built into your user interface. So if something goes wrong, does it just glitch and the customer is left out in the cold? Or can you tell them, hey, something went up, something went wrong, sorry about that. And whatever your kind of end to that, that transaction failure, you're making sure that the company is on the wrong side of that transaction, not the customer. So that's also something that you have to think about when people are interacting with your network. So communication is key, and making sure that if something goes wrong, it's the company that eats that, not the customer, I think is super important for our philosophy. And then the last part is, if you are good about knowing when it's broken, if you're good about talking with your customer when it's broken, how about fixing it? How quickly can you fix it? And that's something that we spend a lot of time on. So we have a field support function, we have techs in all the markets that we operate in. So they can respond quickly once something's diagnosed. There's supply chain excellence that goes along with having the components you need to provide those repairs that you have to invest in. And if you're not the charger manufacturer, which we have custom chargers, but our hardware is not our own, you also need to have really good relationships, whether it's with the charging manufacturer itself or someone who's highly trained on that hardware, like a charger help or something else, like who really understands deep diagnosis of issues, or you in-house that diagnosis yourself. Like you really need to be able to understand your hardware and diagnose at a deep level and make sure that you're invested in that. So that presence, that field tech presence is the part that's important, and also your ability to have a deep library of knowledge for how to diagnose things when go wrong. Those are the other things you have to invest in. So that's kind of how we approach making sure that you do everything you can to make sure that things don't break, but you also need to be highly prepared and invest in a lot of different areas so that when it does, it gets resolved quickly and your customers are still happy.
Awesome, Drew. That was really thorough. Really appreciate it. One more question for you, kind of off a little bit different. What role, if any, does driver support play in the consumer experience in keeping charging stations online?
Well, for us, it's huge. I mean, you can imagine as a network operator, that's super important. We need our customers to be happy. In a perfect world, you don't need it because your stuff works all the time, but that's not how it goes. Plus, people sometimes just have questions about, how do I use this? What is the X's and O's of interacting with your station? And so driver support's really important. So we have 24/7 call line. And as our network continues to grow beyond just the thousands we have now, it's something you have to invest in staff. There's nothing more frustrating than already encountering a station that you are hoping to rely on and then be put on hold for like an hour. It's something that we must avoid. So it's really important. What we would seek to do and what we seek to do with our customer support function is arm them as much as possible with access to what's going on at the station, and the ability to maybe even for certain things do remote starts or remote diagnostics and actually help the customer, and you frankly use the customer as a high-level diagnostician on the phone with you, to maybe identify what's going on. So to me, it's super important. I think if you do not have a customer and a driver support function that can help walk people through what they feel like is a very critical interaction, fueling their vehicle, you're doing it wrong. And it's something that every operator needs to invest in.
Thanks so much, Drew. All right, Tom, you're up next. As Shell looks at expanding its charging portfolio, how does Shell Recharge Solutions help enable reliability?
Well, hi, Mooney. Thanks for having me. There are a number of Shell businesses engaged in transportation electrification, and Shell Recharge Solutions, until recently known as Greenlots, provides our Sky software platform and a range of services to many of them and to our other customers, such as electric utilities, fleets, automakers, cities, and many more. Since we launched our Sky Care maintenance service, it has been extremely popular with our customers, particularly with larger organizations. We offer a number of service levels and options that are built around an integrated, interoperable system that also leverages the robust hardware validation process that we manage in our Los Angeles Innovation Center.
That's great. Now, for EV charging, do you think drivers expect a replication of the gas station experience as it comes to reliability? And how can we ensure that the industry meets driver expectations?
Mooney, as EV adoption increases, there's been a clear trend towards higher expectations for reliability by drivers and particularly fleets. Drivers also increasingly expect the level of ubiquity of charging that they've become accustomed to with other fuels. Meeting driver expectations for availability and reliability of charging implicates an all hands on deck approach to encourage organizations to both plan and budget for maintenance from the start. Importantly, with organizations like the Energy Commission, playing key roles in setting policy and enabling funding until the market matures.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was really interesting. Last but certainly not least, we have Camille Terry. Camille, you're the CEO of a business that's dedicated to the operation and maintenance of charging stations. In that role, you work with many different network providers. What are some of the best practices that you've seen as it relates to maintaining uptime?
Sure. Mooney, I actually have just like 5 slides because I'm visual that I
Great.
can share that like goes through it because I'm just like, I can chat about these things or I can show you cool stuff.
I would love to see cool stuff.
So at Charger Help, for folks who do not know, we enable, we're technology for EV maintenance and workforce enablement. So just super quick, what we were able to do recently was working with a multi-state utility. We went and did what we call an assessment. And at that time, that customer had over 130 open and unresolved tickets that had been open for months. When we went out and did the audit or the assessment, what we saw was that most of these stations actually showed up as available and online on their platform. And so why is that, right? And so one, this is actually from the DOE's website. This is what we call a dumb charger. And so the things to point out here is that there is just one line of electricity here, a line of electricity, and then the data lines are just from the EV to the car, and then from the meter back to the electric utility. This is smart charging. This is network charging. And so some of my colleagues mentioned earlier is that there's a lot of players at play. There's a lot of interactions of data, and there's a lot of spaces, one, for there to be failures, but most importantly, there's a lot of places that people can point their fingers at one another, not because they do not want to solve the issue, but oftentimes you actually do not know whose problem was it, right? Like, was it actually the network provider, or was it the manufacturer, or was it the payment processing system, or was it the phone, or was it the driver, right? There is like this complexity of this issue that I think as an industry, we didn't really truly understand. But we've done something cool. You know, EV charging is the first deployed IoT assets. So the things that we learn from this experience, we can actually apply it as we move towards smart cities. And just to get to my last couple of slides here, starting from the left, this station had been offline for 32 days. The network provider thought that the station was underutilized because it showed up as online and available. In the middle, this station had not been used in 17 days. The utility thought the station was underutilized. And then the last station had never been used. And the site host just thought the station was underutilized. So I know one of the things the commissioner stated earlier is that there is this idea of reporting data, but sometimes what we find is when we report the data, it just shows that the station was underutilized. So there is like a next step that we have to take as an industry in order to make this better. And so the last thing that I'll wrap up with is that the thing to me that it brings me hope is that I think that we know how we got here, right? And the initial RFPs and the program requirements, we focused on installation and turnkey solutions, but we didn't have any funding towards O&M. And we said that you site hosts, you mom and pop shop, you're responsible for keeping the station working. you may have bought a warranty, but it was a resold manufacturer warranty. So if it's a software issue, then no one's going to go on site to figure out if we can fix it or not. And then the other thing, like we talked about earlier, there was a complexity in the issue. And so how we see solving this problem is that it really comes down to what type of O&M products, right, can we offer to site hosts, right? That is not just a manufacturer product and not just a software product. It's a product that allows for reliability. It's a product that says that whether it's the manufacturer's fault, the software fault, the car's fault, it doesn't matter. Someone is going to be on site in order to fix this issue. And that's where we have to get to. And I think the way that we, some of the things that we're excited about is that we've seen more and more contracts that come out just for O&M. And then this allows for private entities that are specialty is IoT assets that are publicly deployed to properly participate and to support the industry. So I'll wrap there, but thank you so much for, indulging me with my little slides.
Camille, that was so great. Thank you so much. And it's always good to see a case study. It puts actual imagery and really what's going on. Just shifting gears here, I do have one last question for you. Your organization works a lot in workforce development. I'm curious, what opportunity is there for a new workforce to be developed to tackle reliability issues in the field? For example, what specifically can educational entities like technical colleges do to prepare the workforce for this new genre of work?
Sure. So when ChargerHelp was first started, we went out and we employed folks full-time as technicians. However, what we knew that we wanted to do was to be able to create a model for other folks to know, one, who are the right people? How do you keep them trained? And how do you work with partners? Today, we're proud to say that some of my techs are actually in the meeting here. So hi, techs. Today, we're proud to say that, the ChargerHelp technicians are the most certified technicians on manufacturers in the US. And a lot of times with a lot of the manufacturers, we help them build out what their actual training curriculum would be, right? And so now that we've done all of that work for the industry, we've now been able to help a lot of folks start understanding, like, okay, what should someone know about a charging station? What should be important that they should know about OCPP? And then how do we keep track that this individual knows every single version? And within the platform that we've built out, that's what we call a workforce enablement. That's one of the things that we're doing. And so community colleges, I think, can rely on entities such as ours and in the industry that we've done a lot of the grunt work to make this easy for folks to enter in the industry and get good jobs. The last thing that I'll say is that one of the things that we also did was we established the ONET code with the Department of Labor, which is called EVSE technician. So it's a real job, right? It's a real job that folks can identify and actually find the breakout, and it's replicable for folks. And it actually shows what are the things that allows somebody to be a successful EVSE technician.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille. All right, now let's jump into some questions from the audience. And this one is broad, so anybody jump in. Does charger redundancy on site host sites have anything to do with your strategy on reliability?
I think I could take that one. The answer is yes. And every year, I think it becomes less and less important. So right now, what you see is that charging stations are getting used because they exist, right? Like there aren't enough. And so if they exist, people will go. I think if we're successful in deploying at the speed and with the aggressive approach to the market that we all want to see, redundancy is going to become important on a site only if there's nothing else around, right? People have options. So maybe if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're thinking about road trips and you're thinking about, basically stations that are being deployed specifically to open up a leg of a trip, yeah, you really need to worry about that. If you're in a city, if you're in an area with dense charging networks, really what you want to start thinking about, if you're a network operator, which we think about a lot, is actually what's the right number of stations for the site host, for the behavior and for the drivers on the site. And if you invest too much in redundancy, you're actually just sinking capital somewhere where it could be better served elsewhere. So no one wants broken stations, but the strategy of kind of putting in more stations than you need just to ensure uptime, I think it's kind of important now in urban areas because there still aren't as many as we want to see, but really close, you know, in the near future, I think we're going to see a lot more charger ubiquity, and you get that redundancy locally anyway. So I think it's a different approach for long distance trips and networks where you're not going to see a ton of investment as much versus urban, where, you know, the business model is better, the utilization is higher. You're going to get a lot of charging stations. There will be choice. And, you know, as we think about building our network, we're not investing heavily in redundant, like increasing our capital costs just for redundancy. We're basically taking the approach that redundancy will be built into the urban network itself.
Great.
And I just a response from the government side, like we're not committed right now to a strategy around redundancy, but it is something we're exploring. And I got to say, I went to Imperial County a couple weeks ago for the ribbon cutting of the first public L2 charger, the first one in the entire county. And so as we see the Ford F-150 rolling out, we want to make sure rural communities get access. I do think, you know, what happens in urban centers where the industry goes is very different from what's happening in the rural places where we need access.
Great. So this is kind of a basic question, but one that we've gotten from the audience a couple times today. Is there a major difference in upkeep as it relates to level 2 versus DC? What are the major pain points that you see? And that's open for the team.
I'll take that one.
Great.
Worlds of difference. I mean, you're talking about a level 2 station that is, you know, a fancy electron pass-through device. When you're converting AC to DC, right, and then doing that at high power with smarts in it, this is a much more complicated piece of power electronics, and so you really do have to have trained technicians. So on an L2 failure, it's pretty easy to swap that unit out. Okay, one person can unbolt it from the pedestal or the wall. With a DC charger, 50 kilowatts and above, you know, you've got to shut it down. You have to have your PPE. You have to have a you know, personal protective gear. You have to shut the power down. I mean, there's a lot of considerations. Then now start putting these at gas stations. Then you have a whole nother slew of considerations and safety concerns that you have to comply with. So it's a very different.
That's so interesting, Dan. Camille, I would be interested from a technical point of view as you're training your technicians. Is there a different electrical skill set that's required to maintain L2 or DC? Is it the same thing?
It's definitely different. All of our technicians are trained for DC fast chargers. So like the L2s is just like the other thing that they do. Most of our customers are DC fast charger customers. I will say one of the consistencies that we have seen, like from our work order data from last year, out of like 2,000 work orders, 43% of them were communication. And this wasn't separate from L2s or DC fast chargers. There was just a communication issue, period. The second big tranche was about 32% of the issues were parts. And the parts that we were swapping out were motherboards and controllers, which also for the L2s isn't a big issue anymore because most L2 providers created modular units. And so you just swap the unit, put in the other piece. I know some DC fast charger manufacturers are switching to modular components because what we do see as like a big barrier is that to my colleague's point earlier, you know, with the DC fast charger, there's a lot of different components inside of them. And sometimes you would get an error code that there isn't any direct correlation to what the part replacement needs to be. And so you end up having to switch 3-4 times before you even figure out what part it was. The cool thing that we've been doing at Charger Help is that we aggregate that data. So over time, right now I can see, okay, 9 times out of 10 across these different states, when this error code comes up, it's probably going to be this part. And so we've had the pleasure of working with folks like ABB and Tritium and different folks to be able to give this data back to them to cut down on this work order call, because in the last thing I'll say, in the beginning, we would sit on site maybe 5 or 6 hours for one call, one station issue, sitting on a phone with a software engineer. But we've been able to cut that time in half by aggregating the service call data, right? So we get smarter over time, but we have to collect the data when someone goes on site. And that was the piece I think that we have been missing as an industry.
Great. You know, Tom and Drew, we've talked a lot about what happens when a charger goes down, but our audience is curious, what role does preventative maintenance have in keeping chargers up?
I can start on that, Mooney. So again, definitely a bit of a dichotomy between level 2 and DC fast charging. You know, level 2 definitely implicate less preventative maintenance as a general rule than DC fast chargers. You know, for many of the reasons that that Dan and Camille mentioned, but also just, I mean, think about and you know, just like any new experience for a lot of drivers, they've never plugged in to a DC fast charger before. And it's not that complicated, but it does take people a little while to get comfortable with it. And so even just, you know, kind of putting the plug back where it goes can be a bit of an issue. And indeed, the holders and where the plug kind of goes back to may look different for different hardware models. And so it does take a little bit of user experience to kind of get comfortable with that. But that's it said, as Dan mentioned, a lot of different components on a DC fast charger. Some of them are power related, some of them are payment related, some of them are communications related. Indeed, preventative maintenance is really critical to happen much more frequently on DC fast chargers. And you know, this sort of urban-rural divide is something to be very cognizant of, because in urban environments, there tend to be more people around, generally more usage of chargers. And so you don't necessarily see, I mean, forgive me for the illustration, but a tumbleweed or similar that is up next to the charger and may be affecting the performance. So just some of those things. Camille showed a photo of a hornet's nest, I believe.
Yeah, Wasp Nest, Washington.
Yeah, so these are real things that happen, and where the chargers are and how much foot traffic, vehicle traffic they have definitely plays a role. But I'll just acknowledge, as Camille showed on the slide, there are a number of elements of reliability, or indeed recipes to get to success with reliability. And so if any of those pieces are missing, they can definitely impact or implicate, you know, higher costs or lower performance around other aspects of the pieces of the puzzle.
Great.
Yeah, I think there are two types of preventive maintenance, at least. Well, one would be eyes on site, making sure you do find the wasp's nests or something else that's wrong that will eventually lead to a failure, and kind of making sure everything stays clean and up to date and there's nothing that looks wrong that could eventually cause a failure later. I think that's important for safety. It's important for customer experience. We care a lot about how our stations look, so we want them cleaned as well. So there's that type, and I think it's incredibly valuable, and it will definitely help you identify things maybe before they happen, which is great. There's another type of preventive maintenance, which is trying to predict when a failure is going to happen through like big data and analytics and stuff like that. And for me, financially speaking, your data's got to be killer for you to swap something before it breaks. So that's not something that we do. It's not like we have an exact understanding of exactly how many cycles our level 2 or DC fast cables are going to finally fail on or something like that. Like, this is not something, you know, you'd have to be so good at that for it to be financially worth it. That's not something that we're doing. I'm ready for the field to get there, but I think it'll be a while before that's something that we would proactively do.
Got it. Commissioner Monaghan, one question for you that came from the audience is, we know there's a lot of money coming from the federal government, and we also know that definitions of reliability can change agency by agency. So is the CEC going to be working with the federal government as they disperse funds into California?
Yes, we're talking with the federal government right now. I mean, the decisions they make, of course, are autonomous, but we're informing that decision-making process. And it really is like a pleasure to have the federal government as a partner instead of in opposition, which is what we had in the last administration.
One last question for the panel. What state and local policies work for you guys when it comes to maintaining reliability? What are good relationships with state agencies that you have as it comes to keeping public funding flowing and getting chargers out on the ground?
Mooney, I might start there as well.
Great.
We have the pleasure of having Commissioner Monaghan with us, but I really can't understate how important the California Energy Commission is, not just here in California, but really to the industry. This is where policies happen. As you heard earlier, we're starting to see real requirements around funding programs for maintenance. I think, what we're going to be keeping an eye on going forward is, how we really encourage what I mentioned earlier, and that is budgeting for maintenance from the beginning. I think that the level of uptime that was referenced earlier is probably not the level of uptime that drivers are going to be expecting going forward. And as soon as we keep going higher and getting closer to 100%, the costs go up to provide that level of service. And so really being eyes wide open and thinking about how we can bring everyone together to solve kind of the budgeting challenge associated with maintenance, as well as the planning challenge from the beginning is so critical. So we're thrilled that the Energy Commission is leaning in and very optimistic about where we're all able to go together in this area.
I can chime in on that as well. A couple of years ago, RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, did a report because they were finding, I think, issues of under budgeting for EV charging programs. And so they did a series of interviews that incorporated what they called the soft costs. And this includes things like permitting and technicians and really the 5-year extended warranty service level agreement kind of costs that are critical to infrastructure. I mean, once you start peeling back, for example, how a petrol station works, there are a lot of contracts and agreements that go into making sure that that site is up and running with the uptime that it has today. I think, Mooney, you mentioned that petrol has had 100 years, or maybe Commissioner Monaghan did. We're trying to compress this into 10 years. They've had a lot of years to get their systems in order, and it's cost a lot of money. And it's going to be the same with us, and we can do it. The technology is here. The organizations are here to do it. It does have to be acknowledged in the budgeting process to make sure that all of this can happen, and all of these costs. And there is a critical difference, by the way, between an extended warranty and a service level agreement. And that really needs to be understood, because that's very important.
And the way that we see it is that it's really twofold. One, operations, like the maintenance piece of this, needs to be separated from install. Like it has to be, because we have to get a better understanding of like, what are we solving for? And today I haven't met a manufacturer or network provider that can tell me that every single error code they know how to fix. They have action items for every single error code from OCPP. We don't have that yet. Can we get there? Absolutely. But I think though, as much as we spent time of figuring out the permitting process, like, so I used to work for a network provider and I deployed a lot of charging stations for Electrify America. And when we were going through that, just like figuring out permitting, we gathered as an industry, figured out permitting, and it helped, right? We got there, but we had to problem solve for it and really understand what the problems were. I think that maintenance of charging stations is the same thing, where we're gonna need to separate it, get a tag team around it, and understand what does it truly take to maintain these stations? What is the cost of it, and who is responsible? because I do not believe that a network provider should be responsible for everything, right? But stations will get vandalized. Hornet nests will come inside of a station. Should that be the responsibility of a network provider to know that that's happening, that they have to fix it? I don't think so. However, I think that we have the opportunity to empower our site hosts to feel a part of this, right? And I think that first step, make it separate, and then you allow for a product that it doesn't matter whether it's the manufacturer's fault, the network provider's fault, or whoever, the site host, right, the end person can actually purchase something that they take ownership over, and then they're also responsible. Because if we continue to give everything for free, folks are not going to feel the pain of being a part of this, right? And then it's never going to take off, right? So I think that there's a couple of things, but the first step is let's separate it from install. Let's figure out how do we solve this specific problem. And we can, because we've done this before. We can do hard things.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I want to express a very hearty thank you to our panelists today. It was a great discussion, and we are so thankful that you joined us. Just a few quick slides before we wrap today's session. We are thrilled to invite you to our upcoming events this summer, including 2 webinars and our Summer Summit Series event on Wednesday, July 27th. More details to come soon. Please join Veloz at the 4th Roadmap Conference in Portland from June 29th to June 30th. You can use the code seen on the slide for a $50 discount. For more information about our upcoming events, industry newsletters, and much more, please subscribe to our e-blast at veloz.org. And you can share, follow, and tag us on all of our social media platforms. We just love to hear from you. We encourage you all to become a part of the Veloz revolution by contacting us at the email addresses shown on the screen on our last slide. And if you would like to participate in our upcoming webinars or have any topic ideas, please reach out to our program director, Alfred Artis. To our panelists, once again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Commissioner Monaghan, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.